So, friends, welcome. My name is Stephen Fetter, as you know, and I'm delighted to be your host for the evening again. It's an interesting job I have to manage this United in Learning stuff, and we run the gamut with all the different programs that United in Learning does, but all of them are different ways of being the church. And what a privilege it is to be able to sit in this chair and connect with people across our whole country on all sorts of different churchy topics. So thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being a part of this tonight. I hope that you took Cheri's invitation to do some homework to heart and that you were spending a little bit of time thinking about strategies and guaranteed income and guaranteed livable income and some of those things. And we'll have some time in small groups and a little later on to do some sharing of some of the strategies you've been thinking about, and maybe some brainstorming about strategies you haven't thought about, but other people have. So that'll be part of our event tonight. But before we get going, I see some of you are already adding territories to the chat, and I would like to encourage that. We need to begin our meetings recognizing who we are and where we are and how we or our ancestors came to this land, and how we interconnect with the people who have lived on this land for thousands of years. And so I invite you to take a moment to reflect on those things. We're past the day of truth and reconciliation, of course, but these days just remind us of the importance of doing this all the time. So let us know what treaty you're on, where you are sitting, and how you connect to the people who have nurtured the land you're living on or have been nurtured by it for thousands of years. Take a moment to pause and just to read those that have come in. I'm not going to try to read them aloud, and then we'll open with prayer. I join with Juan Her, recognizing the Huron-Wendat, the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I always find it moving to see the variety of nations and treaties that we recognize every time we gather as a national group. Thank you for your contributions. And so let's open with prayer. Let us pray. You have gathered us, O God, from across this whole continent. You have gathered us mindful of the different treaties we have made, and in some cases, the unceded territory that we live in. You have connected us to the land and to the people who have lived on it for thousands of years. And you have invited us to wrestle with what it means to take our calling as disciples seriously, to work with leaders in many different disciplines, to hold out a vision of a world transformed and caring and generous and compassionate and just. And so be with us tonight. Be with us as we support each other and wrestle with strategies and learn from each other and ponder what it means to work with people from different backgrounds towards a common goal. Help us to hear. Help us to discern. Help us to be curious and impassioned. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So let me just mute the mic so we don't interrupt each other, and I'll invite Cheri to come up and join me. We spent some time last week, mostly with Cheri and me in conversation, me asking a whole bunch of naive questions and Cheri just kind of giving us this fire hose of ideas and thoughts. But at the end of the evening, we agreed that we would spend the next two sessions together kind of working on case studies. So although we're going to focus on guaranteed livable income tonight, because that was the national issue that most people wanted to talk about, we're using this not as a way to build simply coalitions around that particular issue, but as a way to say, I'm going to use this as a case study. What can we learn for how we would approach any national issue? What are the tools? What are the levers? Who are the allies? How do we find them, sort them out? What are the tricks of the trade? What's worth doing? What's maybe not so much worth doing, or more of a waste of time? So as we go through the program tonight, that's really where we're going, and we'll spend a lot of time focusing in on this guaranteed livable income issue, but with the purpose of trying to figure out, okay, how does this conversation teach us about tools that are out there, whatever the issue is? So that's kind of where we're going. And Cheri, why don't you just give us a snapshot of the issue so that we're all kind of on the same page around what we're doing, and then maybe you could tell us who Leah Gazan is and why we've got a sort of introductory video from her.
Yeah. So first of all, guaranteed livable income has been around. The concept's been around for about 50 years. It is certainly not a partisan one. Hugh Segal, who's a conservative senator, initially championed it back in the day, but it has gone through several iterations. I think we all experience some guaranteed income if we're getting a CPP pension or something. But the idea is to raise people out of poverty, everyone out of poverty. And we got an experience of a little bit like that with CERB during COVID. So people who got CERB, it certainly saved them, many of them, in terms of being able to pay the rent and feed themselves. And really the mandate, the call is keep it going. Keep it going. It's more cost effective and it works. It doesn't cost any more money. So there's a myth that's shaken, and it definitely raises people out of poverty. So it's efficient, and we proved we could do it during CERB. I asked Leah Gazan she was the person who tabled the Guaranteed Livable Income Bill in the last Parliament. Now with the federal election, all the bills die. You have to start again. So she is starting again. She's going to be tabling the bill, and she sent some greetings tonight just to this group. So that was very lovely of her. Right now, you can imagine it's chaos on Parliament Hill. All the parties are coming back. They're all looking at what went wrong and what went right, more what went wrong, I think, in most of them in the last federal election. And many of them are having their caucus meetings right now. So the NDP not exempt from that. So sadly, we couldn't have her in person. She sent a little video, and I'm just going to ask Stephen to play it. So listen, greetings to all of us.
Sure. Here we go.
And Leah, by the way, is part of the Lakota Nation.
I want to let you know that I remain committed to fight for a guaranteed livable basic income for all. It's not okay that seniors in this country live in poverty, that persons with disabilities live in poverty, students, temporary foreign migrant workers, and refugee claimants who are often forced to work for abusive employers that violate their human rights. It's time that we ensure that everybody can live in dignity in Canada. Now let's be honest. We have income guarantees already in this country. GIS is an income guarantee, not livable. Employment insurance, income guarantee, not livable. Social assistance programs that put families in deep poverty, individuals in deep poverty, people with mental health and trauma that fall through the cracks. I am looking forward to working with all of you as we move forward in this next Parliament to fight for a guaranteed livable basic income for all. Now, we have a lot of work to do, and I am ready to do it along with you. Take care, everybody, and enjoy your event this evening.
So as you listen to that, any sort of initial thoughts, comments coming out of that, use the chat, and we'll just kind of collect initial reactions here before we jump into anything else.
what we're going to do, of course, in our small groups is talk about, okay, so how do we do this? How do we make this happen? Again, new parliament, new experiences being brought to the table. But what do we do to get this into law?
Merle says, what sources of education are available for congregations? Good question.
I was moderating for Word on the Street here in Toronto for a new book that's called The Case for Basic Income. I highly recommend it. It's a paperback and it's not expensive. So if you just kind of Google it, The Case for Basic Income, it was put together by a journalist and also a prof out of Queen's University with some basic facts and figures and a little bit of history of the movement. So that's a really good synopsis, easy to read. I would just go there. But if you just Google basic income or guaranteed livable income, you'll get a raft of material as well.
Well, and I would say certainly, Merle, for United Church congregations, this is an issue that a lot of general council time has been spent on. And so you'll find some good resources on the general council website on this particular issue too, which certainly can go, they're framed to be shared with congregations. So.
Keelan has just put up a link there in the chat. So basicincomecanada.org. So there you go.
So how many of you were aware that Leah Gazan had tabled this bill? How many of you knew that this was an issue that the NDP had picked up and that she was championing? Somebody, I can't see everybody's hands, I'm afraid, but somebody's saying yes. Yeah, a few of you. Have you had any connection with her? Those of you who knew she was doing this, have you reached out to her constituents' office or talked with her staff or done anything like that?
Somebody, Merle's saying new via community group, not church. Yeah, I mean, and believe me, it's not just Leah's alone. Leah tabled the bill. Really important to know that there are community groups across the country that have been working on this for quite a while. Again, last week I talked about that that policy experiment for all of those who were social assistants in Lindsay, Ontario, and for others in other centres. 4,000 people took part in that. There was a pilot project in the 70s in Manitoba. So this has been tried, not only in Canada, it's been tried other places as well. Laura's saying something interesting here, that Leah focused on what we can do. And her comments address a lot of the naysaying. Should we try in our small groups to minimize the "this can't work" talk, or is it important to work through? Stephen and I were talking a little bit about that. Where's the pushback? But I would suggest that you focus in your small group what you can do where you are, how you can strategically move this issue forward. Just some general ideas. We're going to come back after, and you'll put your general ideas in the chat. Stephen will describe that too, and then we can talk about what has worked in the past, what can work, how to go forward on this. And we can win this. This is a winnable issue.
I think that's really important. And I think particularly when you're dealing with an issue that's 50 years old, you can sometimes feel discouraged. So we want to invite you to take some time in small groups, just because when there's 25 of us on the line like this, it's really hard to get a word in edgewise. We'd like you to focus on 3 different things, and I'm just going to put them in the chat here. In your small group, take some time to identify ways to build support in your community, in your church, in your neighborhood for this issue. What are you doing? What could you do? What are the strategies that you're using right now to build support so that other people know what the issue is? And maybe using Keely's website or that general council website would be one of the strategies. Identify the people and groups that you would partner with if you were going to take this another step. Who else in your community is working on this? Do you know? How would you find out? Can you kind of identify those? And then your politicians. We've got a politician on the line here. Cheri is passionate about these things, but also passionate about ways to connect with our politicians. And we're going to pick her brain to find out the best practices, how to do that. But you probably already have some thoughts and you maybe have been trying some strategies. So if you can spend some time, and I think we'll take about 12 minutes in small groups, and I think we'll do it in groups of let's say 4 or 5, so that you actually have some time to get into the nuts and bolts of this. When you get into your small group, you will find that they're up in the top right corner, there's a countdown clock. So it'll tell you how much time you have left. I would say please kind of judge your time accordingly and make sure that everybody has enough chance to speak. When you get into your small groups, you'll find that the chat, if you open the chat from your small group, it's the same chat as you're looking at now. So those 3 areas that I put into the chat will be there and available for you. You can pull them up in case you need the reminder. At the end of the chat, we'll come back together again. We'll collect kind of the most important issues that emerged out of your groups and invite Cheri to comment and to riff on them. I told her earlier today, there's a technical term for you. But to kind of say, where could you go with that? And how could you play with that? And how would you put some legs under this idea? So any questions about that before we jump into our small groups and roll up our sleeves? Now's the time. Put your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them before I push the button. Cheri, you're going to end up in a small group because I can't prevent you from being there, but you can just come back into the main room with me.
Okay. Have fun, everybody.
Yeah, down in the bottom right corner, there's a button that says help, and another button that says leave. So you should be able to come back to me fairly quickly.
Sounds good.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions. So I'll open the rooms and we'll see you back here in 12 minutes. So welcome back, friends. I hope the small group time was helpful, and we'd love to hear you get a just sort of what were the highlights there of your small group. We don't need to hear every idea that came out, but let's start with the first question: ways to build support in your community, in your church, in your neighborhood. What kinds of ideas emerged in your small group around that, and what kinds of questions do you have about doing that you'd like to ask Cheri? So we'll use the chat, and the agenda is in your hands. The thing about using the chat this way, Cheri, is that we can't see what they're typing until they push enter. So there's often this little bit of dead air as everybody's madly typing, and you and I are saying, oh my God, nobody's listening to us anymore.
Yeah, so this ways to build support in your community is, define community however you want it. Could be church, could be beyond, could be groups, could be online, could be,
I mean, there's all that stuff coming out of general council, right? I mean, I don't know whether we run study groups in our congregations, whether we sort of push that over to the minister to write a sermon. There we go. Jane Dawson, there's an active national network on this topic, on this issue. Contacts in every regional council. Lois Wilson is co-chair with Barry Morris.
Fabulous. And Laura said we asked how to shift the conversation when people are already reluctant to hear the topic. Bring connection with larger groups already working on this. Good one. Talk about the successful pilot projects. Yep.
Sometimes storytelling makes a huge difference, eh?
Mons is great here. Multi-faith reach, right? I'm interested in connecting with rabbis whom I curl with. Cool. In Israel, there's support for Orthodox Jewish men who do not work but devote their life to study of the Torah. Yes, and it was quite an election issue in Israel when I was there a few years back. People were really upset about that, that not only do their are their children not subject to conscription, or whatever you may think of that, but also they don't have to work. They're supported by the state. So that was an issue in the election. Continues, though. Congregation in Toronto prepared lawn signs and bumper stickers. That's great.
Wondering if there's folks online who have done stuff in your congregation about this. Have you created bulletin inserts or done Zoom Bible studies or those kinds of things? What kinds of things have you done? What kinds of things have you found useful as you're trying to present this to your own community that you're part of?
I like Elaine's to work with local groups advocating for better social assistance rates. Anti-poverty groups are a very good place to find also pro-guaranteed livable income support.
So Cheri, if you were going to try to talk about this at your church, what would you be doing with the Trinity St. Paul's folks?
Well, here's what I think we have to be careful of when we're talking about getting together with others in our community, including our church, is that it not stop there. Because my experience in churches often is that we are very good at talking and getting together and sharing a meal, and then it kind of stops there. It kind of doesn't go from there, or there's a book study group. So all of this is good. All of your ideas are great. And they all center on getting out of your own little safety zone, which may be your church, and getting out to other groups, reaching out to other groups. So that's really possible. There's some great ones coming up here. But I think, certainly if you have a Sunday or that you devote to poverty issues, if there's some kind of working group, mission outreach group in your church, to make this a focus of that group is a very good thing to do. Certainly, so you have some heft behind you when you leave the building, but definitely leave the building, either virtually or in any other way. Don't stop there. I find that we're very good in the United Church at discussing, as I said, and not so good about getting what we've decided to a politician who can do something about it.
So that leads me to the second question that folks were supposed to talk about then, and that is, who outside of the building should we be talking to and working with? What kind of strategies emerged in your congregation about ways to build coalitions in your community?
Some of that has come through here. Julianne, for example, saying having somebody, this is a great suggestion, with lived experience with poverty speak to your group or congregation. I'd say congregation's good, engages people at a heart level, and make sure you have resources for them, local groups working on the issue, etc., and where they can contribute. Could we have the link or contact for the webinar? It's not a webinar for the Case for Basic Income, it's a book. It's a book that just came out, Canadian. So if you just Google the Case for Basic Income, I'm sure it'll come up somewhere, and you'll be able to order it online. So there's that, or ask your local bookstore to carry it.
There's one here coming up on Amazon, April 15, 2021.
There you go. Could you, Stephen, maybe put that link in there? Thank you. And here's another link going in there as well. Perfect. Yeah, and keeping in mind, very good point by Killen, keeping in mind that there will likely be people already in your congregation who have had experiences with poverty. We often think of ourselves as middle class, and we sometimes and often are, but we're not only middle class. We have impoverished people in our congregations, and it's important to take cognizance of that we're talking about ourselves as well as others. And I love the old kind of adage, nothing about us without us, and that goes for people who are living in poverty as well, that we don't talk at them, but we talk with them, and that we hold their voices up. Yeah, so Donna Nelson had said earlier that her church is doing something on homelessness tonight, so that's why she's coming in a little while. She'll be a little late in joining us.
So friends, what other community groups in your neighborhood have you been connecting with, or do you think you might want to connect with if you were going to take this the next step? who else in your neighborhood, in your church's neighborhood, is working on this besides your outreach committee in the congregation? Do you know? And if you don't, how would you find out? I mean, sometimes it really helps to know who our allies are on an issue, right?
There's one, Basic Income Now Network of BC. Food banks, thrift stores, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. ODSP action groups in Ontario, or disability support services actions wherever you are in other provinces. Social assistance groups, we talked about that already. Together Against Poverty in Victoria, TAPS, absolutely. ISARC in Toronto, perfect. Yes, that's another good one. Yeah. Yes, ACTRA. The unions, this is a good point. Not all unions are in favor of guaranteed annual income. You might get some pushback in unions about guaranteed annual income. Here's what they object to. They object to the idea of the kind of Milton Friedman basic income, which is below the poverty line, a kind of baseline amount of money that everybody gets. This is kind of the very conservative view of basic income. And the objection that unions have, and that we should probably all have to that, and instead we support guaranteed livable incomes, is that all it does is prop up bad employers. So for example, you get cases in the States of Walmart whose employees are on food stamps. So the government is supporting their poor wages by giving food stamps. In that same way, basic income could be used to top up terrible wages. We do not want that. That is not the kind of basic income program. You need, if you look at CERB and the amount of about $2,000, the pilot projects were less than that, but they were more than ODSP. So I think they were about $1,700 in the case for basic income. But yeah, you want something so that you don't have to take slave wages. That's the whole point.
Elaine's wondering how you'd answer union concerns about lost jobs. I presume that means lost jobs in the civil service.
In the social services. Here's the answer to that. The answer is not, you shouldn't need to lose jobs, but instead of those jobs being policing people on social services, which is a lot of what they do, which is who wants to do that? That's not a great job. Instead, supporting people who are living on basic income is how that job would be redefined. They still need supports. Homelessness still, finding housing is still going to be an issue. That's a whole other issue, getting housing to everyone. So there's lots of work to do in the social services without policing people who are on social assistance. And that's a lot of what they have to do. So that takes that work away and gives them better work to do. So it shouldn't cost jobs at all.
So I think it's really helpful when we're grappling with a topic, to figure out who are our allies, who else is working on this issue, and how do we stop just talking in our own little echo chamber. Anything else that came up in your small groups about that, or anything you're kind of responding to in this conversation? But if there isn't, that's fine. We'll go on and talk about the next question, which is, how do you connect with the politicians who might be able to change some laws around these things?
Yeah, some points here about BC before we move into that. BC income assistance for a single person. Yeah, it's terrible. That's about what it is in Ontario. That's abysmal.
Pretty much the same.
You can't live on that. You can't live on disability, which is about twice that, over twice that. You still can't live on that. And yeah, Keelan's put it $783. Let me tell you again, remind you again, that I was on social assistance as a teen living on the streets. And back in the day, so this is not partisan, it was conservative government in Toronto, Ontario, and Ottawa, that you could, on social assistance, rent an apartment. I had a basement apartment as a teenager. I could feed myself and go to school on basic social assistance. There's no way you could do that on $783 in a city like Toronto or Vancouver, or anywhere else for that matter.
You can't find an apartment for that, let alone anything else.
No,
you can't find a room in a rooming house.
Yeah, so all that does is give you enough money to sit on the street and in a shelter if you're lucky. So it's more or less useless. So again, instead of policing people and making sure that you qualify for ODSP and all of the paperwork that goes into that, these government employees could be doing what they should be doing, which is being supportive of people who are living on basic income, quite frankly, who are still living below the poverty line.
So just for those of folks here who are not in Ontario, what is ODSP, Cheri?
Oh, sorry, Ontario Disability. So disability supports, which every province has some degree or another.
Disability supports are different from social assistance. How? What's the
because you have to
assumption there?
qualify for them, and it's a humiliating process for many people. You have to get a doctor's note, sometimes many doctor's notes. By the way, there are also follow-up visits to make sure you're not living with someone when you're on social assistance. In Ontario, I don't know what other provinces are like. There's all sorts of policing that goes on around these supports, which is humiliating. I actually think it's counter to charter rights. There have been challenges about them. So rather than do that as your job, wouldn't it be better to work with somebody around, social supports, housing, et cetera, which is what they found in the pilot project, is that people who were in Lindsay, for example, where everyone on social assistance was part of the pilot project, was that those people who were in social services, they're social workers, actually had time to do what they really needed to do, which was to work with people to find housing, work with people around, medication issues, work with people on other supports rather than police them. So there's that.
So those are really helpful ideas around partners and allies and building coalitions. The third question we asked you in your small group was to identify strategies that you're using or might use to deal with politicians. And Cheri showed her bias by telling us that politicians are the ones who really change things. That makes a whole lot of sense to me, Cheri. But
well, if you want to change a law, it's got to go through.
They're certainly the ones who change the law.
And we're talking about changing a law, a big law, right?
It's a huge one, isn't it? So yeah. So what emerged in your small groups about that, or what have you been thinking about since we started talking here? Which politicians? How do you identify them? Who are you talking to? What kind of success have you had? What tools will you use? I'm full of questions, right?
Yeah. Julian, again, saying disability in BC is around $1,200. Also, a 35-page form to fill out with you and your doctor. Can you imagine what a waste of time and money? And it's ridiculous. So
yeah.
Anyway.
And the assumption is that you're so ill you will never work again. So you're supposed to be able to live for the rest of your life on $1,200 a month.
So yeah. So the ethics behind this is to keep people who cannot work in poverty forever. Think about that as a Christian activist.
Jesus had an awful lot to say about poverty.
Did indeed, and this week in particular.
So, yeah, I'm still not seeing a whole lot of politicians in the chat. How are we doing?
Okay, phone an MP for appointment, go with 3 others to visit to talk. We didn't get to strategies, but we asked what has been the barrier for 50 years. Good point.
Very important question, Lauren. Yeah. We'll get to that in about half an hour. If we're following the agenda that I drew up on the back of an envelope.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could, do you want to just Stephen, we can just jump into some of this as people are putting this stuff up. Yes. So I think I mentioned this the last time. So remember this, you have incredible power. So I'll just say that over and over again. You are the people who put politicians in their offices. They cannot get there without your vote. They need to hear from you and want to hear from you. And that is absolutely the attitude you should have when you're trying to get a meeting with a politician, because it's the right attitude. That's simply the fact. Now, you'll find you're talking to staff people first to get that interview. Be that persistent dog with a bone. Be that person who does not give up. And yes, it's good to not go alone, but to go with some others. It's good to say, my church, to add some weight behind you. Remember, church, hundreds of votes in the politicians' ears. My church, we were talking about this at my church, and I want to come with 2 others to talk to you about guaranteed livable income and how we can move this issue forward. Can I have 15 minutes of your time? And now on Zoom, it's a little easier to get 15 minutes of their time. And again, keep doing it until you get that audience. If you can't get that audience, find another politician in another riding or another district that might listen to you. You need a champion on this, and you want a champion that's not necessarily an NDPer. In fact, it's better if you've got Leah, tabling the bill. She's an NDPer, but if you've got a Liberal who is your MP, great. Member of the government. You want, at best case scenario, you want a cabinet member who's sitting at the cabinet table to be your champion. But I mean, even if you can't get there, you want somebody to be your champion. You want to, if they're conservative in your riding, again, visit them. Don't assume that they're against this. Hugh Segal, conservative senator, was a champion of this. So there's no reason to be partisan about this issue. And in fact, there's every reason to be nonpartisan about it, to talk to whoever will talk to you and to have them know who you are, know your church. And just imagine if churches right across Canada were all doing this with their members of parliament, trying to get 15 minutes with them, talking about guaranteed annual income. This is incredibly powerful. If you find yourself in Ottawa, or holidaying there, or, when Leah, keep in touch with Leah's office to find out when the bill is being tabled. I mean, nobody will know that yet until, the settings are set on Parliament Hill, but find out when it's going to be tabled. If you can listen in online, do to when it's tabled. Usually first reading is just nothing, there's no debate, but when it comes up for debate, then you want to tune in, you want to hear the debate. You want to know that the people you've talked to by that time are part of the debate and on the right side of that debate. And you want to know if it passes second reading and goes to committee, you want to be on the roster to go and testify at that committee. And don't think there's a more expert person than you. No, there isn't. You are the expert on this issue. All you get to speak is probably 1 page or 2 pages of written notes. So take that opportunity, get that time. There's nothing beats that personal connection with your champion, and you're going to keep going until you find that champion. Is it better to represent a collection of churches? Yeah, but we don't wait. Like the time it takes to get consensus across 11 or 12 congregations is time wasted for you and a friend of yours from your congregation getting an appointment with their MP. Remember, politicians for the most part don't understand churches or how they work. So every single, the more churches, the better. But I would say the 11 or 12 congregations all separately going has way more impact than you saying, I'm speaking for 11 or 12 congregations. Okay. But what if 2 people from 12 congregations all tried to get an appointment with this person? You may not all succeed, but the very fact that all of a sudden, all these churches in my riding, all these churches in this area are all talking about guaranteed annual income. What's going on? This will get attention and this will get action.
So, Cheri, let me stop you here.
Sure.
I'm going to incorporate Laura's question, but I want to back up for a minute and talk about Leah and her role in this, because I don't live and breathe political process. So what does it mean to be tabling the bill? What's her role in all of this? How is she a key player, and how should we be interfacing with her and her staff?
Sure. So she will read the bill, which is the first reading, and that's it. That's all that happens at first reading. That means it's on the order paper. It's there in the public view.
Okay.
You would like to find out when that is, because then you've got a bill number. It'll be a C something that you can then organize around. It's this bill that we're organizing around. Now, one of the things that you want to find out when you're speaking to a Liberal or a Conservative about this bill that she'll table is, are you going to support this bill? And if you're not supportive of this bill, why not? Find out what it is with them. You then provide an incredible bit of information back to her staff, because this is where negotiation happens in political circles, right? So you want to find out what are the objections from your member, if they're not an NDPer, or if they're supporting it, how then can we all get it to second reading and then to committee and then finally into law? What are the hurdles there? So you're thinking like a politician now. You're thinking about someone who actually wants to turn this bill into a law, and you're going to help them do it. You're thinking like a staff person, right?
So you said something interesting here. You said that we as individual citizens might be able to get something useful out of the liberal or conservative politicians that Leah and her staff wouldn't get. And
Yeah.
we could be a sort of mediator there. That's
Well,
fascinating to me.
I mean, in a sense, you're a mediator, but in another sense, more importantly, you're an advocate. And more importantly, remember that you are not alone, that you represent, you represent thousands, sometimes millions of Canadians who feel the same way about an issue. Polling will show, but you're the face on that issue, and you're being the face on that issue to your representative. And so when the debate happens in the House and your MP is standing up and they're a liberal or conservative, they're answering to this, or they're not, you have talked to them. They know how their community feels about this issue, and they're much more likely to be the one to vote for it or to raise it in their caucus, or preferably, of course, the cabinet table, where you're talking to the Minister of Social Services or the Minister of Labor or whoever's going to be taking this on, right? So, I mean, again, this is your aim. Your aim is think like a lobbyist. Think about, how do I get an audience? How can I make my point heard? And the more of us, the better, that try to do that. And also, of course, just on social media, you can use social media to do this too. But I mean, there's nothing really beats that in person. I mean, as I say, for my bills that became laws, there's a face behind every one of them, and they're not people with power. I just did an interview for my radio show with a young woman who was named Shannon Bertrand, who was the face behind PTSD in Ontario is now a workplace injury for first responders. She was a young paramedic who suffered from PTSD. The last person, she was too shy to speak in public. She just came to the staff and said, I can't get a claim. I can't get paid time off work because they don't believe that I can't prove I got PTSD on my job. Well, ridiculous. For police, corrections, firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, you often can't prove that. So that's why we fought. It took many years, but it was that young woman who did that, and she had no power whatsoever. She just brought it to our attention. We thought, wow, this is important. And then all the unions got on board, like it grows from there, right? So you want to be part of the growing process of this in your community.
So if I'm ready to screw up my courage and get out of my comfort zone and actually go and talk to an MP, how do I do that? I mean, do they have time for me?
Of course they do. I mean, you are, as I say, especially if you're their constituent, you represent. I mean, there were some ridings, if we recall recently, our federal election, that were won by 70 votes.
Wow.
70 votes. The last election I ran, I usually won by many thousands, but the last election was one of those for me. I won by 500 votes. I can almost put a name on every one of those votes. I talk to people at their door. Politicians come to your door in elections. You're now going to their door after the election. It's a two-way street, and they know it, and they need it. They need to hear from you. You are members of church communities, and as such, you represent, quite frankly, just hundreds of potential votes to them, and just for people who know people who know people. And you also represent, a polling reality. Jane's here said 50 senators supported universal basic income, right? So you represent polling on the issue, which is always in favor. So you're just the face on that. And you're the person that's going to be standing at the mic for all candidates meetings, also very important, saying, why don't we have guaranteed livable income now in this country? And they know it. They know that they're going to have to answer to you at the mic.
And so I pick up the phone and I talk to this MP staffer and I ask for a 15-minute meeting. And it could be on Zoom or it could be in person in the constituency office. How do I prepare to get my message packaged in a way that I can get through to the end of it and still have some conversation in only 15 minutes?
Yeah. Well, if anybody's ever been in a sales job, one of the things they say to potential salespeople is if you're in real estate or whatever you're in, the faster you go through all the no's, the sooner you get to the yes, right? So be prepared to be rejected. Like just try again. Again, if you keep coming up against a brick wall in your own riding, try the next riding, try somebody else, research who might be a champion that you can make contact with you. Zoom gives you the whole access to the whole country. So be pleasant. This is a potential friend. You're trying to make a sale here, you know. You phone them up, you're pleasant, you say, they're going to ask you what's the issue, and you're going to say, I am a part of quite a huge community, and in particular a church community. I go to blah blah church, and I'm here because we feel strongly about guaranteed livable income, and I really just want 15 minutes of time with the MP, just to strategize. Like, you know, because what you don't want is them to say, oh yes, they're in favor. Thank you very much, just so you know. You say, okay, so, but what we want to know is how can we win this? How to strategize, invite them into the conversation to strategize with you. If they're in favor and they're a liberal or conservative, great. How can we make this happen, right? That's what you want to discuss. If they say we're not in favor, say, well, I'd love to meet with them just to find out why that is, because we're doing research as well. And remember, lead with the fact that you live in their riding, that you're part of a church community in their riding. That's always the best entry ticket, because again, politicians want to get re-elected.
So let's be clear. The reason that Cheri is talking about talking to a liberal or conservative is because the bill that we're talking about is being sponsored by an NDP person. And so it's probably safe to assume that other people in her party are likely to support her work. The issue is how to connect with the people in the other parties. It's not that we're assuming you're NDP. It's just we're acknowledging that she's NDP. How do we find out what the bill says and what its number is and when it's coming up for debate and some of those kind of logistical things?
Her staff. So she put her coordinates up there. They're easy to find. Just Google her staff. Just ask them if they can let you know when the bill will be tabled. Say you're working on it in your community with other people in your church community and wherever, and you really would like to know when the bill's tabled, then it's given a number, and actually what the bill says. It's probably not a very long bill. So, and again, once you've got that, I mean, that helps, right? Because when you go to see your liberal or your conservative and they say, well, we support a basic income, which you might hear, but we just don't like her bill, or there's something in her bill, right? You might hear that. That's interesting information. So find out from them, what is it? What is it about her bill that means you wouldn't vote for it? This becomes part of the discussion, and also, you know, part of the, as Stephen said, kind of part of the mediation of building some grassroots support. But again, it's not just enough to poll. It's not just enough to petition. Certainly not just enough to write a letter. You want the face-to-face connection with folk. You want them to know your name.
So how much does a bill change from the time that it's tabled at first reading to the time it gets passed? Is it pretty much the same, or can it be kind of totally reworked or somewhere in between?
As it can be all of the above. I've had bills that took me 5 tablings over 6 years, 7 years to get done. And I had banning conversion therapy in Ontario. It took me 2 weeks from the second reading to passed into law. Before Pride, timing is everything. The then government didn't want to see us marching in Pride, saying, you know, they didn't do this, right? So, I mean, timing is a lot to do with this. You never, ever know. I mean, groundswells happen. I mean, the PTSD bill I just talked about, I mean, it took years and years of constantly, finally, we got kind of all party support, well, almost all parties support. The government finally brought it in on their own. But you know, a young police person in Toronto shot himself. It was front page news about suicide among first responders. That helped move that along incredibly quickly, right? Obviously, you don't want something like that, but stuff happens. The world, things happen in the world. And trust me, this winter is going to be brutal for people who are on social assistance. We already see, you know, tents in our streets, in our parks. Well, just think winter coming. There's not enough shelter space anywhere, and you wouldn't want to stay in those shelters anyway. So it's going to be an epidemic of poverty and homelessness in this country.
Well, especially with COVID and the shelter is closing and an impossibility of social distancing and church out of the cold's not happening. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's scary. So
and CERB, you know, the experience of CERB. So people have this experience of CERB. and they're looking at this experience of homelessness that they might be facing without it. So I think the timing is good now to really, put the pressure on.
So Laura says the MPs are all in Ottawa. I'm not. How do I connect with any of these people when they're busy in Parliament?
Okay, so they're not always in Ottawa. They're at home in your riding, or should be. They come home to your riding. Your riding gets them elected. Ottawa doesn't get them elected. Their party doesn't get them elected. You do in their riding. And so, first of all, on Zoom, you can talk to them from Ottawa. It doesn't matter. But even pre-Zoom and pre-COVID, people have usually days, like I would have, 1 day a week. In Great Britain, they call them surgeries. I could never get a straight answer for why they call them surgeries, except that
you're veterinarian.
But yeah, so they'll have a day, usually a day, probably less for MPs, but you have time where you're sitting in your desk and you're seeing people one after the other. And that's the ideal. But I mean, Zoom is fine. Like, give me 15 minutes on Zoom. You can do it from your desk in Ottawa. It opens it up to that. So they should, in fact, have more time to see you, not less.
So if you get 15 minutes, how would you apportion out the time? Presumably you want to do some kind of presentation. You want to invite some kind of conversation. How long is the presentation? How long is the conversation? What's the closer ask?
So we would always book half an hour in my office. But I mean, you ask for 15 minutes because that will take them aback, because they're used to people who don't know what they're doing asking for an hour and never getting it. So if you ask for 15 minutes, it's hard to deny you that, right? It's hard to deny you that. Although you would ideally like to have half an hour, let's put it that way. And the 15 minutes might turn into half an hour. So what you're going in, you want to have key talking points. You want to have no more than one piece of paper that you're going to ask a politician to read in bullet points, because politicians have so much stuff to wade through just in the course of a day. That's all they'll take in, but you want really key bullet points. And it's easy to find those bullet points based on a little bit of the research you've done before you've walked into that office. Do they support it? If they support it, then it's going to be about strategy. How do we get this passed? What do I need to do? How can I help you get this done? It's always, how can I help you to actually make this law? If they say, no, we don't support it, then the key bullet points will be why they should. If, for example, it's a conservative that thinks it costs too much money, Hugh Segal, conservative, costs less, get those facts ready based on a little bit of research you've done on where this person stands on the issue. And by the way, voting records are public, so it's easy to find voting records from the last session. And so that's how you approach it. And just always be friendly. I mean, this is a sales presentation. You want this person to be your friend, whoever they are, because this may not be the last time you go to see them. Once you've opened that door and they get to know you, we had people would just come and have coffee with us in our constituency office, to just drop in, right, and say hi. I mean, you want that kind of relationship where this person really is your representatives, really knows you as an activist around guaranteed livable income, and knows that you're not hostile. You're not there to shout at them and bang on the door. You're there to work with them to get this into law, and that's the kind of approach.
So we should talk to Leah and her staff about the logistics and to let her know where we stand and that we're allies.
Yeah.
We should talk to our own MP because we vote for them, and they are more likely to listen to us than any of the other MPs are. Who else should we talk to, and how do we identify those folks?
So your own MP, if they are in favor and a supporter, say they're a Liberal, they're in favor of this. They may have some issues with strategy, so you want to find out what those are so that you can help them. And so there's kind of not too much more you can do there for now. Keep going. Who are the other potentials? Again, Zoom makes the whole world small. So who are the other potentials around where you are? Broaden your circle and broaden your circle. And this is where, if one of you, and this is what a lot of activists have done in my experience, is one of you from one church in my riding comes to see me, and then they connect with another church member who maybe not feeling as confident as you are, because you've already done this now, from their riding. And so you meet with them and that person's riding, and then another church and another person's riding. You go with them to meet them if they're not that confident. So this is a way of getting, crossing a whole province pretty quickly, especially on Zoom. Zoom is a great help in this, in getting to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, right? And actually, and earlier when we were talking about connecting with other groups, probably some of those other groups have already done some of this. So I think your advantage in part might be that you're a new group. You're from Church of, the Weeping Mary, right? So this is your church and you're representing this church. And they think, oh, I haven't heard from that church before, thinks the MP. Whole other group. I've heard from these activists. I know them, but not her and not this church. And then, oh, I've heard that from that church now, and more and more and more and more. So it spreads that way. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that's really helpful. Next question. And it's Jane's question. You've been talking all the time about dealing with our elected representatives, and that makes sense. You were one, right? Mm-hmm. And there isn't a Senate in the provincial legislatures, but there is in national parliament, and that's what we're talking about tonight. What about senators, and should we be connecting with them, and how does that work? Is it different, same?
I would wait on it, because when the bill goes to the Senate, that's when, just before that happens, if it's passed the House, then all of a sudden gear up to start approaching your senators. And your senators are, regional as well. So again, even though they don't have to care about getting reelected, which I think is too bad, but I mean, they still care about you, and they should care about you. And you just saw here, 50 of them supported universal basic income. That's pretty good. That's a good hefty bunch.
So you're suggesting we talk to our elected representatives, because this is Leah's bill that she's tabling, and so
you have to get it through the House
first.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have to get it past the House of Commons before it goes to the Senate. Yep. So you start where we are. We want it passed here, and that's 3/4 of the battle. If it's passed in the House of Commons, more than that, probably 80% of the battle. Right?
Sure.
And then we can focus on the Senate. But it's important to get it passed in the House of Commons. That's what we really need.
One of the things you said to me this afternoon was that you really thought it's helpful to have a voice at the cabinet table. How do you get that? How would you get that for Leah's bill? Sure.
So if you're lucky enough to live in the riding of a cabinet member, doesn't matter if they're, attached to this issue or not, or it's their portfolio or not, even better. That's great, because they'll be at the cabinet table and they can become your champion, you hope, right? Mm-hmm. So that's important. But even if you don't, if you're living in another riding, say you're living in an NDP riding and you already know that your members almost, de facto voted, supporting this, well, lean over to the next riding, to where there's not an NDP member. Try to approach the cabinet. I mean, if 2,000, we've got about 2,000 churches in the United Church of Canada across country, coast to coast to coast. If 500 of them all wanted to get 15 minutes, one person from each congregation, with the cabinet minister in charge of that portfolio, you think they wouldn't notice that? Of course they would notice that. Even if they said no to 99.9% of you, they would notice, their staff would notice that we've just heard from 500 different congregations across, the country about this one issue. I mean, we're still the biggest Protestant denomination in Canada. We still represent a whole lot of people. So just use those numbers. And again, Zoom makes it all possible. You don't have to, fly anywhere, go anywhere. You just want 15 minutes from your church, and you just want to inspire 15 minutes. Everybody asking that right across the United Church of Canada would be brilliant.
So all other things being equal, which ministry would be the one dealing with this issue? Which would be the logical?
I'm not. Yeah, social services is what we're looking at. But I mean, why I would go to the Minister of Finance. I haven't paid about her. I haven't paid attention to the current makeup of the new cabinet. But I mean, I would go to the Minister of Finance. Why not? Start at the top. The Minister of Finance is usually, it's Premier, it's Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance. That's kind of the order of power.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the people you don't see, but as Stephen says, the guys in short pants and women in short pants behind them, but the advisors, the strategists. But I mean, guess the message here is don't stop. Start where you are, work your way out, inspire other people to do it. You can go with them on Zoom. You could have 2 talking heads on Zoom. Somebody from the riding is always a place to start. And remember that the Minister of Finance has a riding too. So is there a United Church there?
Yeah.
Connect with them, invite them to come with you because you've already done it once, to go and see them. If you live in Trudeau's riding, ask to be able to get 15 minutes with Trudeau. You'd be amazed. Sometimes he responds. I know a doctor in Ottawa, the Jabapalooza, he responded to her because, again, you never know. So just keep going until you get response. And when you get response, keep going until you get more.
So this is one of those issues that's going to cross the provincial federal jurisdiction, right? Because
Maybe,
social services tend to be implemented by provinces, but funded by national. So should we be doing this at the provincial level as well at the same time? And you haven't talked at all about that.
Yeah. Oh, Keelan has said Marilee Fullerton. No, sorry, Keelan. She's provincial. Marilee Fullerton is provincial.
Well, and the Ministry of Social Services is provincial.
Is provincial. But there would be, I would go right to finance on this one because ultimately they write the checks, right?
Well, that's what I was wondering, because social services, the provinces are very jealous of their authority to administer programs.
Yeah,
public safety, maybe. Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting point because this might be something. CPP is federal, right?
Yeah.
It's a guaranteed annual income, to people over a certain age. Sure. It could be administered federally. It might not necessarily come under social services. So, hedge your bets. Like, go to try the top, see if Trudeau will respond to you. Honestly, think that way. But these are just human beings. And they need to connect with the voters. They want to connect with the voters. Their staff, of course, will run interference for them because they get a million requests. But you want to be, again, that dog with a bone, that squeaky wheel that just keeps going until you finally get your 15 minutes. And if you can't get it here, you get it there. And if you can't get it there, you get it somewhere else. And you would be amazed how often you can get through. This works in all areas of life.
Yeah, you told me a story this afternoon, Cheri, about Christine Elliott and how Christine Elliott ended up supporting one of your private members' bills that had nothing to do with her portfolio and everything to do with her own personal interest. Share that story, because I think that's
Sure.
really instructive.
She supported a couple of my bills, but I would say, when we first got trans rights as human rights in the Ontario Human Rights Code, took many years of tabling, took a lot of work, but finally it was a tri-party bill. So I had a conservative, Christine Elliott, sign on, a liberal, Yasser Naqvi, who's now an MP, by the way, and they signed on, and we got it done with a liberal government at the time. So there's an example, and it was because she was lobbied successfully by a woman who was on social services, trans woman on social services, who just made it a point to visit every single member of provincial parliament here that would let her in the door. She did exactly what I'm telling you to do, and she was successful. So there's that. I have a million stories like that. The other story is like, don't be shy. I have a radio show and podcast, and there's all these people I'd love to interview that I think, oh, they'll never say yes to my little radio show and little podcast. But what the hell? So I sent off. So there's this one person, if anybody follows epidemiologists on Twitter or on social media, he's Dr. Eric Feigl Ding is his name, and he's got 500,000 Twitter followers. He's been on CNN. I've seen him talking on panels. He's American. He ran for a Democratic Party. His primary didn't win. But so this is a big name. He was one of the first whistleblowers about COVID in the early days when it was just some weird thing happening in Wuhan, it's Wuhan province. So he's that guy. So I thought, well, I don't know. I follow him on Twitter too. So I just sent him a direct message and asked and he said yes. I got a 30-minute interview with him. You never know. So this is, again, try, right? Ask. I know many people in Ontario who've had Doug Ford on the phone because they simply phoned him up and he answered the phone. I mean, wild things happen, right? So keep trying. It's amusing. It gives you something to do. It doesn't take any time much. It's all online, right? Or on the phone. So just try. Yeah.
So as you're preparing for these conversations, it's easy to imagine a conversation with somebody like Leah because we're all on the same page. So we're in our echo chamber. How do you prepare to deal with somebody who you know is uncomfortable with this idea or is planning to vote against it or thinks it's a terrible idea? How do you put your arguments together or your talking points together in a way that's going to have integrity for you and might be persuasive for them?
Well, I guess the simple thing is these are human beings you're talking to. How do you change somebody's mind? I think one of the ways it doesn't work very well is if you just come at them and just say you're wrong, right? A way that might work much better is to say, oh, really? So tell me more. You're not supportive of a guaranteed livable income. Can you explain to me why that is? I'm just interested to know, like, and genuinely be interested to know. And they will list these things. And then just like a good salesperson, you look at the objections and then you would say, well, be prepared with, as I said, the bullet points about why it costs less, what the benefits are, why people will still have to go to work for a living and still want to go for work, like all the things that you might suspect they might come at you with, but do it in a gentle conversational way that, just you're having a conversation with them about this. Clearly you feel strongly about it and they don't, but, be their friend. You're friends, right? You're talking. And trust me, enough people do that, their ideas might change, especially if it's enough people that want 15 minutes with them from their own writing. So, yeah.
So it's helpful then to spend some time ahead of time thinking through what are the kinds of objections that people always raise to this stuff, or what are the kinds of things I've seen in the press or those kinds, so that you have an answer. So you've got the bullet points, so you're prepared with the stats, so you're not just caught flat-footed. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And so you can, I can tell you, the case for basic income gives it that book. But I mean, here's very fast bullet points. So large companies like Walmart's don't like it. Why? Because they think people won't work for their terrible wages. And they're right. But guess what? It's an equal playing field for capitalists as it is for workers. And competition is the name of the game, workers too. So back in the 80s, people had to pay actually more in some ways per hour than they do now, because there were so few employees out there. It was hard to find employees, and it's hard to find employees now to work at those jobs. So guess what? They're going to have to pay more, just like rare things under capitalism cost more. So, and it's an equal playing field so all the Walmarts and the Costco's, everybody's going to have to be paying more. That's a good thing. And people will take those jobs if they're paid decent wages. So that's a good thing. Second of all, it costs us huge amount of money. You've heard this even during the federal election campaign, that CERB was too expensive. They kind of did it hushed tones because it was so popular. But I mean, no, it's not. And there is study after study that shows it's cheaper than the way that we administer social services right now. It's cheaper. So there's that. And of course, then you've got all the costs of poverty, the justice system. We've got hospitals, increased hospitalizations, all the social determinants of health. Guess what? That's longer and harder to prove, but that's also real, and they know it. Poverty is expensive. These are obvious things that people will come up with. And so just be prepared for them and have the link, the study, and just give them information at that point. Simple bullet form, 1 page. But the main thing is to make contact. The main thing is to develop a relationship with, this is good for not just guaranteed livable income. This is good as activists for anything that you want to get active around in your area, for sure. And find yourself a champion. You'll find one if you keep going. Somebody will say, yes, let's do this.
So we have about 5 minutes left in our time together. We're just about at the end, and we wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about next week. So I guess this is your last kick at the can, folks. I've been trying to work with the questions that have come up in the chat and then follow through some of the ones that Cheri and I brainstormed earlier today. Anything that we haven't touched on? Any ideas that have kind of jumped out at you? Anything you'd like further information about before we switch gears here? Now's your last chance.
And just a shout out to Laura, who talked about Medicine Hat's Housing First project. People here convinced a conservative mayor to try it and became a champion. There you go. There's lots of examples of stuff like that, right?
These things work partisan, right?
Yeah, and Stephen, we're going to continue to work on this on the local level with the environment next week. So,
indeed, which is really exciting
about that.
So, last chance to raise questions or raise issues or ask questions to Cheri on the guaranteed livable income.
Yeah, there's Jacobin magazine is yeah, basic incomes, and by the way, a huge issue in the States as well.
Why has it taken so long? Jane says you said that it had, but you haven't told us why you think that's true.
I don't, first of all, I don't know. I can't give you a definitive answer of why it's taken so long. But I think what I would say is like childcare has been, was major issue of second wave feminism in the 70s. And now finally, guess what? We might just get it, $10 a day childcare. So, issues kind of their time comes in some ways. The other thing is, I think we haven't had an opportunity like COVID has presented us where people experience what it was like to have a guaranteed livable income. They actually experienced it. So this is a unique moment in history, and this might just be the moment. I always tell, as I said, the first session, progressive activists, there's no question you'll win. The only question is when. So we want to move that date line up. So we will get guaranteed annual income, livable income. We will. I just know we will. But we want it not to take another 50 years. We want it now. So again, here's a great opportunity. There's a groundswell in the country about it. People want CERB to stay forever. Let's make it happen.
Okay, so I'm going to call time just because that's my role in this conversation, but I hate to because I'm having so much fun myself. Cheri, tell us what we're doing next week.
Yes, so we decided next week on a more local level, that could mean provincial or it could mean municipal, could mean anything. We're going to look at and Laura just mentioned Climate Code Red next week, so it's perfect timing. So we're looking at the environmental activism on a local level. And I told Stephen that I'm going to try to get Mike Layton, who's our local city councillor here. You all know he's the son of Jack, but he's just happens to be my local, and he's been a climate environmentalist. He worked on my very first campaign before he was really politically active. And I'll ask him. So I'll ask a city councillor to come and talk about things that we can just do in our locale, our village, or city, or our area. I mean, and cities can be incredible centers for change, especially in the environment. This is where a lot of good environmental policy and laws are being enacted that seem to go nowhere provincially or federally. So things from everything from bike lanes to you name it, recycling programs, all sorts of stuff happen municipally, but we don't have to stop there. If you think of something provincial, there's provincial parklands. If there's BC, you've got logging of old growth forests, terrible. So all of our provinces have some environmental issue that we want to look at, and all of our cities do too. So I would just suggest that you maybe bring one of those, just from what you're interested in, from your area. And I'll ask Mike if he'll spend just a few minutes with us and talk about some of that as well. If worst case scenario, I'll send a video like Leah did and just say hi.
So I imagine the structure for next week will be pretty similar to this week. We'll spend a little bit of time in small groups. So I guess your homework is to think about what you might say in that small group. And there'd be similar kinds of questions like, what's your experience? What are you doing? What are you hoping for? What strategies are you thinking about? Who are your allies on this issue? All of those kinds of things. And we'll do some of that kind of sharing as we kick it off, and then pick Cheri's brain and Mike's too, if he can make it. around.
I love these good news stories, Stephen. Laura said, I just got Energy Efficiency Day proclaimed in Regina just by filling in a form.
I love it.
There you go. It's a great note to end on.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
So thank you, friends. Again, it's been a wild ride and great fun, but thank you for being with us. Thank you for your comments in the chat and your questions. We're working really hard to build our agenda out of the things that matter most to you, and the contributions you've made here have really shaped our event. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you next week and hearing the issues that bubble up as we talk about your own local setting.
So exciting.
Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. There's lots to be thankful for, even in the midst of our pandemic. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week as we continue to ponder the question of how to be a Christian activist. Blessings to you all.
Night, everybody.